Welcome to Breaking the Stigma, Just Listen. For the next half hour, we're going to share with you the stories of 4 brave members of the LGBTQIA community about how they came out, how they feel about being out, and the struggles they faced along the way. And as the series is named, they don't want your opinion, they just want you to listen. Meet Kai, Mark, Alice, and Chris. They're all just people. The only thing different about them is how they identify. They're all members of the LGBTQIA community, one that, despite society's advances in awareness and understanding, is still fighting for equality. Is that something that people should have to worry about? Is it fair that they worry about it?
No, it's not fair at all. Because as a heterosexual male or female, do you have to worry about it?
And those worries are legitimate.
Police are investigating multiple deadly shootings, allegedly targeting members of the LGBTQ community. The crime's a violent reminder of why those in the community say Pride Month and more awareness is so needed.
There's so much non-education that happens that people stigmatize everything that we do. And so people don't realize that we have these parades, we do all these events, and we act like a certain way because we're trying to get the same rights that you've had for your entire life.
According to Dr. Diane Illig, director of the Safe Spaces Training Program at Salisbury University, and Dr. Michelle Schlehofer, the executive director of PFLAG Salisbury, the struggles for those in the LGBTQIA community are daily.
Because LGBT people face a lot of day-to-day discrimination and hostility. It can be in quite subtle ways called microaggressions, or it can be pretty overt, like denying somebody housing, denying somebody a job, or even attacking somebody physically.
Doctors Illig and Schlehofer say part of the reason those microaggressions and aggression in general exist towards the LGBTQIA community is because most in society assume that the people around them are heterosexual.
And those assumptions lead people to act in ways that they think are harmless, but are actually in many ways quite marginalizing and quite stigmatizing.
But out of the whole community, they say one group suffers more violent acts of aggression than any other.
Trans women are the ones who are most violently assaulted in our culture. Part of that is because it is the idea that masculinity comes with a certain amount of privilege and power associated with being male, and to give that up is a threat to masculinity.
Trans women, like Alice.
Every trans person is worried about whether they pass or not.
For Alice and many other trans people, it's a daily struggle for them because sometimes their anatomy may not match their identity.
So most people don't even acknowledge that I'm even here. They see a tall person and they hear a low voice and they say, "Have a good day, sir." They don't even think about it. They don't even take an extra moment to examine somebody else. They're so wrapped up in their own world.
Although they don't face as many acts of aggression, non-binary people like Kai more so encounter confusion and disbelief.
There's people who just don't believe it. It's the way it is with a lot of queer identities, is people just don't like it, so they don't talk about it, or they shut it down and say that it's fake, or anything of the sort.
Kai identifies as non-binary bisexual and prefers the pronouns they, their, and them, which means they don't identify as male or female and that they are attracted to both non-binary and binary people. As Kai tells it, that's a lot for people to comprehend, and because of that, non-binary people are often the subject of jokes.
The biggest joke that I've heard with this, and I hear it so much, is like, "Oh, well, I identify as an Apache attack helicopter." I don't know if you've heard that one, but people say it a lot when it comes to transgender issues, especially non-binary, because they're like, "Oh, well, if we can identify as anything, then I'll identify as an inanimate object, ha ha ha."
According to Kai, Mark, Alice, and the professors, the answer to fixing those misunderstandings, microaggressions, and more is more awareness and hopefully acceptance. How do we get to the acceptance part, or is that something that we can ask for?
I think we can ask for it, but I don't think we can expect it.
Now, for those who don't know, LGBTQIA stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual. And as you've heard, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to fight the stigma surrounding that community. That's why, as you've noticed, we've only been using first names. The good news is there's a lot of resources out there for those in that community. Camp Rehoboth in Delaware and PFLAG in Salisbury. In fact, we'll have a link to those places on our website, 47abc.com. Coming up after the break, we'll take a look at how that stigma that we just discussed affected our 4 members, Kai, Chris, Alice, and Mark, in terms of their own stories in finding themselves. Stay with us. Welcome back into the 47 ABC special, Breaking the Stigma, Just Listen. Before the break, we talked about the stigma surrounding the LGBTQIA community. Now we're going to talk about how that same stigma played a role in our 4 members figuring out who they really are. Before anyone in the LGBTQIA community comes out to anyone else, they first have to come out to themselves.
How do you know you're straight? Like, are you, like if I was talking to you, I would say, well, are you attracted to a male? And if you said no. Yeah, and I'd say, well, I'm not attracted to a male either. And you just know these things.
The problem is getting to that point where they know, because things like religion, stigma, and more can complicate that. For Chris, a member of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, she says her faith played a huge role in her feeling uncomfortable in her own skin.
This is probably the worst thing I could ever do, and I'm sinning. So I'm probably going to go to hell if I keep thinking like this.
For her, that internal struggle actually caused her to step away from the church, because she said she felt God wouldn't want to listen to her since she was gay. But after kissing a girl she liked for the first time, that's when she said she knew for sure.
When I first felt like that, I was like, okay, 100%, like, this is what's happening. I'm going to just change my life right now. Like, I'm definitely gay.
And for many, that first kiss is a moment they know.
That's when I realized, and again, that's where society takes everything that seems to be as sexual. But that's the final realization that I realized that, hey, boom, the light went on for me. Like, I realized that now I am.
Kai's path was a bit different, though. As a non-binary bisexual, they figured out they were bisexual first. But the process of figuring out they were non-binary was a little different. In Kai's early high school years, they say they tried being a boy because being a girl just didn't feel right.
And that didn't feel right either. So it was later that I was seeing things about other genders and being non-binary. And it was sort of a slow transition of me being like, okay, well, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my appearance? What does that mean for what I tell people? But it's been a journey.
For Alice, who identifies as transgender, her journey really began when she was just a small child, playing a game of grown-up with a neighbor.
So I dressed up as a grown-up woman because why not? That's what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my brother seeing me, and the look on his face was just like, what are you doing? And those words just kind of just stuck in my head, like, did I do something wrong?
As Dr. Michelle Schlehofer, the executive director of PFLAG Salisbury, explains, what Alice experienced was something called gender policing, essentially scolding someone for not acting in a way that corresponds to the gender they were assigned at birth and the stereotypical roles that come with it.
You're sending a clear message that that's wrong, that that's abnormal, that that's something that you shouldn't do, and that's going to be damaging in the long run.
And for Alice, it was, who says her fear of being attacked for her effeminate ways forced her to build a character, almost like a method actor, watching other boys in school to learn how she should act to blend in, something that made her feel like she was a fake and something that pushed her to the edge.
I struggled a lot with alcohol through most of my 20s and some other substances. I was suicidally depressed for a very long time. I've put a lot of thought into it. I've actually held a gun to my head. When your finger hits the trigger, even though it's only like 5 pounds, it's like pushing on a brick wall. That one, it's so hard to do.
Alice says a big part of her struggle was that there was no real LGBTQIA community where she grew up, so she had no knowledge of transgender people or that it was even a thing. It wasn't until later in life, while dating another girl, that Alice met her first transgender person, which then caused her to experiment with her own look. And eventually it was her ex-girlfriend who then pushed Alice to realize who she really was.
She got this brilliant idea, just like, go get a shower, take care of everything, clean your face up, whatever. And then I did all that, and she had some of her clothes picked out, just like, okay, put this on, and then sit down, and she did my makeup, and then it's like, okay, just go into the bathroom, you can see yourself now. And then seeing myself like that was like seeing me for the first time.
According to Alice, that moment was life-changing for her because she finally realized who she really was. But after coming out to herself, she still had to come out to loved ones and family members. After the break, we'll take a look at that part of her story and talk about how Mark, Chris, and Kai came out to their loved ones as well. Now, just as a reminder, we've listed the information for both PFLAG Salisbury and Camp Rehoboth on our website, 47abc.com. But if you need help now, you can call the Trevor Project's Lifeline, a crisis intervention and suicide prevention phone service specialized for those in the community. The number for that is 866-488-7386. You can also text the crisis text line by sending the message START to 741-741. Stay with us. You're watching 47 ABC. Welcome back. Where we last left off, Mark, Chris, Alice, and Kai shared their stories about how they realized who they really are, essentially coming out to themselves. But at that point, no one else knew. During this next part, we'll share the story about how they came out to their loved ones and what a tough process that can really be. Coming out to a parent or loved one.
When I told my dad, it was one of the most nervous, nerve-wracking experiences that I could ever describe. Because of course he's your father, he's your alpha male, he's the person that you admire growing up.
Can be one of the hardest things to do because of the fear of how they may react.
I could have lost my entire life if the people around me went, we're not going for this.
For Alice and Mark, luckily their loved ones were supportive.
Luckily, when I told him, he sat back for literally 10 seconds, but it felt like 3 minutes, and looked at me, and you could see him thinking, you could see the thought process, and he looked at me and he said, Mark, the only thing that I expect and the only thing that I would request from you is please don't wear a dress on Pride Day. So I was just like, okay, Dad, I'm not that kind of homosexual, so you're good. And we hugged it out. We were good. He cried, I cried, and we were actually very good with it.
For Kai, though, since they are non-binary, coming out to their parents took a little more explaining. So instead of telling them face-to-face, one night Kai wrote a letter with examples and left it on the table for their parents to find in the morning.
So when I did get up, I could tell they had talked about it. And I was like, hi guys, did you get my letter?
And they said,
yeah, we did. What?
Eventually, Kai was able to explain, but says even now their parents still don't completely get it.
Like they still have a bit of trouble grasping, I guess, how serious it is and how I'm like, don't call me that. You know, because like they'll still refer to me as she, and like their daughter sometimes when they're talking to like certain people, because I think they just don't want to have to explain.
But at least Kai says they are supportive, which isn't always the case. For Chris, she didn't get the choice of when to come out. Instead, she says her parents confronted her about it one morning during her senior year of high school.
When I came down there, they just said, we want to know what's going on with you. We want to know what's happening. Are you gay? Is this really happening?
In Chris's case, her parents didn't fully accept it, which in turn, along with other factors, drove her into depression and substance abuse.
I started like using a lot, and it's just something that you do. A lot of people that I know, like when you switch your whole culture basically, when you have no way out and you got all this darkness, a lot of times you go to like the alcohol or substance abuse, and that's like the road that I went down, unfortunately.
Research actually shows that when parents respond negatively to a child coming out, the ramifications of that can be devastating.
high levels of depression, high levels of mental illness, anxiety, substance abuse, other forms of self-harming, cutting, burning. All of those things can be indications for an LGBT individual of a hostile environment.
In fact, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, those that experienced stronger rejections were about 8 times more likely to try and commit suicide, 6 times more likely to report high levels of depression, and 3 times more likely to use illegal drugs.
The terrible reality is that coming out to parents is actually really dangerous for a lot of children. 50% of parents, I think is the latest statistic, kick their kids out of the home after they come out as LGBTQ. So for a child to come out to a parent, unless they're absolutely certain that that parent is going to be supportive and affirming of them, that's potentially quite risky, quite dangerous.
The silver lining, though, is that experts say it just takes one really supportive adult in a child's life to steer the ship away from a negative outcome. And often 4 simple words will do the trick. I still love you.
Everybody wants to hear that, whether they're coming out or not. They want their parents' acceptance. And for an LGBTQ person to actually hear that from 1 or 2 of their parents is just the motivation they need, or the final straw that lets them move forward.
And because that positive reinforcement is so vital, that's what makes organizations like Camp Rehoboth in Delaware and PFLAG in Salisbury so important. So if you need somebody to talk to, or if you're a parent just looking for more information, we'll have links to both those places on our website, 47abc.com. With that, we're going to take one more quick break, but when we return, we'll explain how coming out isn't a one-shot-and-you're-done process. Instead, it's more of an everyday ordeal, especially if you're non-binary like Kai or transgender like Alice. Welcome back to Breaking the Stigma, Just Listen. Before the break, we talked about the process of coming out to parents and loved ones and the risks associated with that. But in our 4th and final part, we're going to discuss how coming out isn't just a one-shot-and-you're-done type thing. In fact, it's something that many in the LGBTQIA community have to do every day for the rest of their life.
I think oftentimes we think of coming out as being a snapshot moment in time, right? So you're not out, and then all of a sudden you come out, and then you're out.
When it comes to being out, those in the LGBTQIA community must consider every time they meet somebody new if it's worth it. For Kai, who is non-binary bisexual, it's an everyday thing because most people assume Kai's gender based off appearance alone.
I've gotten used to it because that is my life, the weighing whether or not it's worth it to come out to someone. And sometimes when I meet someone, I won't come out to them, and then it turns out that they're in my life for more than I thought they would be, and I'm like, hey, by the way, and so I bring it up later. So it is a constant weighing of that, which, you know, is what it's like to be non-binary.
The weighing of that decision has many factors, including whether or not the person will become confrontational towards them because of it. There's also the factor of being out in the workplace and how that can affect them. For Mark, who is a United States Marine and served during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era, he was never able to be out to his fellow soldiers for risk of losing his job.
Not only was it not allowed, but it was frowned upon, and it was also something that you did not explore. So in that process, when I was in the military, I would just go ahead and try to keep that persona as a straight heterosexual male.
But acting heterosexual at work is not uncommon. According to Dr. Diane Illig, the research actually shows roughly 50% of those in the community are closeted at work. Although Maryland and Delaware protects people on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation, 29 states in this country, including Virginia, don't have those protections. For Alice, who is transgender, she says her appearance has relegated her to only certain types of work.
It can be difficult, and it's difficult no matter where I go, especially because I can't do the customer service job, so I end up with like the blue-collar guys.
In fact, Alice says she can't do customer service jobs because of the constant interaction with new people and hurtful past experiences.
I even had one person like pull me aside, like, okay, well, hold on, guys, I can. You're a guy, right?
And so what'd you say?
Away.
What'd you say? No?
No. But, I mean, you got those big arms. Yeah, I'm 6 foot tall. There's a lot of big to me. And he's just like, oh. And he just like shook his head like he didn't understand what was going on and walked out the store.
How frustrating is that for you? Because it's like, clearly this is not a guy.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating every time I bump into it. I can't not get away from it.
Another thing those in the community can't get away from, the question of PDA. According to Dr. Illig, those same-sex acts of PDA, even holding hands, can draw looks of disgust, or worse, even violence.
So we have an instance of a Morgan State University student, this was a couple of years ago, got out of his truck and beat 2 men to being hospitalized because they did something that he found offense to. He was in his truck. He didn't have to get out and do that. He could have kept driving.
So how do we solve it? According to Alice, Mark, Chris, and Kai, more awareness, more open-mindedness, and more conversations where people ask questions and then just listen.
Non-binary people exist. We're not making it up. We're not confused. Our identities are just as valid as anyone else's, and y'all need to respect that.
And great places for those conversations to happen are places like P-Flag in Salisbury and Camp Rehoboth in Delaware. And as we've mentioned, we have links to those places on our website, 47abc.com. Now, if you missed any part of the special, we'll have all of this on our YouTube channel starting tomorrow. But with that, I'm 47ABC's Julian Sador. Thank you for listening. Your evening news with Brooke Butler is up next.